Hi, we've got a great webinar today. In our news segment, we're going to cover a recently disclosed medical device cybersecurity hack and its implications for security features in your medical devices. Last webinar, we talked about the FDA's expectations for cybersecurity in a single webinar, a very easily digestible bite-sized chunk. If you haven't added cybersecurity to your medical device, it's a great one to watch. We're going to briefly touch upon at 50,000 feet the why. Why does the FDA have all these expectations for cybersecurity? And they have good reason. And most of the time today, we're going to talk about Secure Product Development Framework, something that gets its own acronym, SPDFs. My name is Colin Duggan. I'm the CEO and a co-founder of BG Networks. Joining me here is Roman Lasecki, our CTO and also a co-founder, and Eric Pettis, who leads our cybersecurity medical device practice. So with that, let's jump into the news. Roman,
news, yeah.
Explain this hack, white hat hackers, I understand.
White hat hackers, yes. Kind of the good ones. Responsible disclosure involved. The hack was on a desktop DNA sequencer. So it's the Illumina iSeq 100. So it's a small desktop sequencer. And the hack that was discovered there, which was just disclosed publicly this month of January, so it's fresh off the press, was around sort of insecurities in the BIOS. So if you look at a lot of these medical devices, you'll find that many of them are based off of these x86 industrial computers. So they run a typical stack where the first layer at the bottom is called the BIOS. Particularly common one is because UEFI, and they found a vulnerability in that. So if you can, these devices are often in use for many, many years. So in this particular case here, the BIOS they were using was from 2018. So, it's 7 years old and they had vulnerabilities in there. They didn't have secure boot. So what the researchers found in this system is that you could tamper with the BIOS itself. There were vulnerabilities in that BIOS that existed that allowed them to install their own code. And what could that code do? Well, the code could, at the hardware level, manipulate the results of your DNA sequencing output. So pretty significant end finding for that. Unfortunately, though, the hack that was discovered was you had to have physical access to the device. So it wasn't something you could exploit remotely. And they have already been able to patch it. So Illumina has a solution to patch the vulnerability that was found, fix the affected systems that are out there. But that vulnerability was probably in that system for quite a while, since it was a BIOS from 2018.
That's great, Roman. And what is this secure boot thing? Can you explain that a little bit?
Secure boot. Well, the first thing that system is doing is it's going to run the BIOS. The BIOS is just software, kind of the first entry in the system. And without secure boot, it just starts up, loads up the code and starts running it. And secure boot is an extra step you would want to do that would say, I need to make sure the code, the BIOS I'm about to run right now is authentic and hasn't been tampered with since it's been put on this device. So that's kind of that first step of security. Don't run code you haven't authenticated is your code and hasn't been tampered with. So that's kind of the missing piece that these systems didn't have in place. It didn't give you the ability to verify it before you run it.
That's great. That's great, Roman. Thanks for that. And secure boot is something I'll just add is we see it as a common requirement. I mean, always with medical devices, you want to understand the context, the use, who's using it, look at the possible threats, measure the risks. And, if you go through that process, most times I would say it's probably a good rule of thumb that secure boot is just about every time needed, because what it does is it gives you what's called a root of trust, right? If you do secure boot correctly, as soon as that device is reset and started, it's going to start executing the code that you had intended to be in there. So it is, we've seen it in other industries, is something that's been commonly adopted.
Absolutely.
Right. Okay. Thanks for that, Roman. That's excellent. Next item, we just wanted to go through the why. A couple of weeks ago, and this webinar series is every couple of weeks. And we just encourage people to join us every couple of weeks. We talked about the FDA's requirements. We basically went through every single topic at a very high level that they have in their September guidance. The intent was, in whatever it was, 25 minutes, to give folks a good kind of overview and set expectations around what the FDA is looking for in terms of cybersecurity. You guys want to comment a little bit? Maybe Eric, if you want to weigh in here to start. Why have they done this? Why have they put this guidance out there? Why are they enforcing this guidance?
Well, it all goes back to the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act that was modified to include Section 524B. And cybersecurity is taking a more prominent role in pre-market submission. And, we can see when you look around at the world, cyber is kind of a mess. I mean, it's created, especially with SAMD products and products that are connected that treat and diagnose diseases, they're very susceptible. So FDA recognized that. They revised the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act to provide the authority to be able to govern. And then they came in with all of their requirements that we talked about a couple weeks ago.
I would distill the why down to, devices are vulnerable. We just talked about one that you have out there, another vulnerability discovered in a system that if you're not thinking around security, there's just going to be more. And I think to some extent, the why is, the FDA since 2014 has been pushing for security, but you still just have vulnerabilities discovered at a rate that was higher than they found acceptable, that I think is acceptable. There's so many vulnerabilities found in these critical devices. That's the why. It's like, it's a need, and the way to get there is through regulation and requiring it at the same level of rigor as they consider safety in these devices.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's great. And, there's multiple perspectives to the why. And I'll add another is, cybersecurity is one of those things that are important. It's critically important. But if an industry or a company has never experienced a hack on one of their embedded connected devices, an IoT device, it's hard. It's really hard to make the decision to say, hey, we're going to allocate resource, right? Because are you going to get hacked? You don't know. Maybe you don't. And if you do, maybe it's contained. And so I think that regulation, the FDA's requirements, is very helpful to make sure it does happen, because it's the same reason the FDA says you can't use probabilities when you're looking at the risks here. It's never happened before, potentially, so the probability would turn out to be zero. But that doesn't mean it's not going to happen. And the trend is that the adversarial nation states that are out there, they're up in their game, they're becoming more active, and critical infrastructure is absolutely a target of the nation states that are out there, the adversarial nation states. So, you might not know it, but the devices are getting probed and tested, everything that's out there, and it might not be exploited today, but it could be something they're saving for at some point in the future. So it really is important, from my perspective. The why is very important, and it makes sense to me that the FDA has set these expectations.
Yeah, when you look at a typical medical device that doesn't include any software or electronics that can be hacked, the whole focus is on safety. You do a hazard analysis, but it's in a static world. Cyber is extremely dynamic, and to think that someone could, come in and hack physically some medical device, they'd have to break in and they'd have to, and damage the device or alter it, and it's extremely unlikely, but so easy on the cyber side.
Yeah, and that remote access that so many devices have now is so valuable, right? In terms of sharing data, servicing devices, but it also is the way in, right? It's
Yeah.
the part of the threat surface now, and so
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's the explosion of SAMD. I mean, everybody's coming out with some type of an app that diagnoses, and that diagnose data is used to treat a medical disease. So it's a medical device, and it's exploding, virtually exploding. The number of products that are out there and the number of consumer products that are making the conversion into a medical device.
it's great, Roman. That I think we've touched on this at 50,000 feet. Any last words on the why?
I would also say, why not secure your designs?
Good.
We'll all appreciate it.
Perfect way to end. Appreciate that. So last item we have today, and we'll spend the balance of this webinar talking about this, is secure product development frameworks. I highlighted it in red here. The FDA says using a secure product development framework is one approach to help ensure that the quality system regulation is met. So they're recommending it. What is it?
Well, they didn't recommend anything else, did they? I mean, that's FDA. Oh, we recommend, well, you really better have it, right? So you've got a number of ISO standards, 1345, 21 CFR 820, all around design control. And then you've got some special ISO standards around software design, 62304. And, they may touch a little bit here or there on cyber, but the whole SPDF is really altering your product development lifecycle for software development to take into consideration defense by design.
That's exactly it. It's you have a software development lifecycle framework. You already have that. You need quality management system to deal with the safety considerations and the risk to that, and how do you make sure you're implementing the right controls and you're verifying your designs are actually safe as well. And what an SPDF is essentially saying, hey, that you need these additional considerations that should be added on there. It's not a separate step though. You can't just say like, oh, it's completely disassociated from everything else. It's all interconnected into your software development lifecycle and processes. So an SPDF is really saying, here are all the ways it needs to be connected in to your existing framework to make that work.
Yeah, and this has been something that has been around in other industries. There's industrial standards that are out there that have been adopted for a long time that are the equivalent of secure product development frameworks. For automotive, there's something called ISO SAE 21434. The terminology is different, but it is essentially a secure product development framework. It talks about the people you need, the responsibilities, the skills, the life cycle of the device, risk management. How do you understand the security context of the device, and the need for threat modeling is part of that risk management. So it is something that is pretty common out there. The standards that I've looked at that are outside of medical are very similar. It's just the terminology is a little bit different, and there's some specifics that are certainly different. And there's some that we've come across that are very helpful. One of them being ISO IEC 81001-5-1. So this is a software secure product development framework. It's a standard that is an FDA consensus standard, so it's a great one to reference. It is software only, so there are some gaps in the standard to be kind of a complete medical device product SPDF, but there's not too many. So I think it's a great starting point for a secure product development framework and just needs a little bit more.
Yeah, it's not only a consensus standard. The FDA's recent guidance, they have a specific call out there in the guidance saying, "Hey, here's one example." They're not prescriptive on it, but it's a great one to go to look at. This would be the go-to one that I would go and reference for implementing an SPDF.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if my mentor recommended that I do anything, it would be silly of me to try to find something totally different to go my own way. And it's, it's the ultimate blender. We in our decks for BG, we have a slide that has a blender in the middle of a whole bunch of different standards. 21 CFR 820.30, 1345 for design, 62304 for software, 81001-5-1 for an SPDF, SW96 for risk management, 14971 for safety risk management. I mean, at the end of the day, what FDA expects is a seamlessly integrated quality management system that takes everything that I've said and blends it together so that they work in concert with each other, so that a singular design team, as they're designing software along the way, does it all at once, rather than trying to do it separately. Like, well, let's create the code, then let's go back and let's look at it from a security perspective. That doesn't work too well.
One of the things I found interesting on this note of blending it together is if you look at 81001-5-1, they have a specific requirement in there that says this needs to be part of a quality management system. So the requirement is you can't just do this in isolation. It's done in combination with a quality management system.
Yeah. Yeah, and FDA requires in the pre-market submission all the good words and all the good documents, the 12. It's like the 12 disciples, right? And they all need to be in there. But at some point, FDA will come back in after clearance, and they'll do an inspection. And they're going to look at a lot more than just the 12 disciples. They're going to be looking at your whole quality management system. And, if you're not prepared and you don't have it, well, then how did you create the 12, to begin with? Did you just pull them out of your hat? So, there's a strong need for a highly integrated SPDF within the QMS that can be used for generating the 12 documents.
Eric, a question comes to mind. I mean, you pulled together our secure product development framework documentation, that we use, that we offer product. And, obviously from kind of the way you were talking about those various specs and the numbers were kind of rolling off your tongue there. You're very familiar. What did you find as you tried to cover each of those standards, right? Because I think some aspects of it are probably, I would guess, easy in the sense that 81001-5-1, it's written, right, to work with, 1345. But like you said, that's not the only one. There was a lot of different standards you needed to consider, right, when you were pulling all that together. Do you mind just commenting on that for a moment?
Yeah, and I could throw in the 5 to 6 different FDA guidance documents as well. So there's probably 10 to 15 different standards, guidance documents, regulations that all have to blend together. So my approach was to use 81001-5-1 as the foundation of the SPDF. And, I created a gap assessment checklist that follows the index of that standard. But then I pull in, SW96, pull in 1345, 820. There's about 4 or 5 different guidance documents as well. And, they all have something to say about the same thing, and they say it a little bit differently. So but you have to follow a single outline. And, our recommendation, our approach is that we followed 81001-5-1. And we took all of the other associated standards and regs, and in that format from top to bottom, we sprinkled in all of the additional requirements along the way, such that our checklist, if it's used to do a gap assessment of any company, will identify any of the gaps for the whole blender. And it would become the foundation of creating an integrated quality management system, because that's how you would do it.
Yeah, that's great, Art. That's really fantastic. And I think one thing that is really great about the work you did is it's compliant with all these standards that are also good for MDR over in Europe too. So the intent behind this was not only for the FDA, but also if medical devices are being brought over to Europe, or maybe they're being certified first there. And our idea there is to kill two birds with one stone. We think that's possible, right? We think that's can be done, and it is a reasonable thing to do. And you can highly leverage the information generated for the FDA, the 12 docs, follow this process, and then that becomes your evidence for certification for MDR. And then you can go vice versa also, which I think is a good thing. And time saving, if you think about it ahead of time, you can save yourself time if you're both targeting North America or the United States and also Europe.
Yeah, that's the nature.
We got a question here from the audience that I think would be a great one to discuss. The question is, does the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 have complete practices for an SPDF? And is it more or less onerous than 81001-5-1 or SW96?
That's great. Great question, Roman. So the NIST Cybersecurity Framework is more of a generic framework. And the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, I think, first thinks about IT security and not so much product security. And there'll be differences between IT security and product security. So, for instance, the way you think about the damage scenarios, the impacts of a cybersecurity hack, typically from an IT standpoint, you'll think about it in terms of information disclosure, and then availability, operational capability. But you have this whole safety issue, along with operational also, that you want to think about for your medical devices that are a little bit different. The safety aspect is certainly different when you start thinking about that, and overlaps into DFIMA work, and you'll have, this is one of these points about the intersection between the two, where you want to have a clean intersection. And that's another thing that you get from 81001-5-1 is that it is meant to be used in conjunction with a safety and effectiveness process that's meeting FDA quality system regs. So Roman, that's my view on it. I think it's
like an organizational security framework, not specifically a product software development security framework. And so I think it's very complementary to that. And again, I think there's these interconnections that we've been talking about. And if you again look at 81001-5-1, they have another requirement that says you must have secure IT policies and practices implemented. They don't list off a specific standard, but they're saying organizationally, you need IT security as well. So you can't just say, oh, I've designed my software secure, but I have no IT security. No, you need it all.
Yeah. And I think if you're talking about the medical device security, as I look more closely at the question, it's definitely going to be a lower bar. The chances of getting, some questions back from the FDA for 510K submission is going to be much lower if you follow the 81001-5-1 and SW96. So great question. But then you start thinking about like general frameworks like that, or security frameworks, and you start thinking about ISO 27001, 27002, SOC 2, and these are other standards that are out there that also, in some sense, they comply or they're very connected to the NIST cybersecurity framework. So yeah, great question. Really, really wonderful question.
Yeah, and I think the final sentence, is there anything else other than SW96 and 81001-5-1? And I would point to the FDA guidance documents, the 2023 guidance on pre-market submission content, the 2016 guidance on post-market, and there's 3 or 4 others. And that kind of, they all talk slightly differently because they've been issued at different times by different people at the FDA. But collectively, it provides FDA's thinking, and you want to think like they think.
Well, guys, I think
it's a good way to phrase it. Think like they think, because it's I think the way they're thinking is good.
Yeah.
Hey, we're coming to the end of this webinar. Do you guys have any final comments, thoughts about secure product development frameworks that we haven't touched on yet?
Nothing particular. Just it's going to be part of your process. You're going to need to get it integrated, and if you don't have the practices in place and you're already working on a design, stop now. Start doing your design securely and put the process in place.
And it is the tangled web that we weave. Being compliant doesn't mean you're going to be successful. Doesn't mean you're going to make any money. So it's, business isn't a charity. And, we hold up that we want to protect patient safety and deliver products that can make a difference. And we absolutely believe in that. But we've got to do it efficiently and effectively. And so creating that tangled web is important because it can drive inefficiencies if it isn't done well, because it is complex.
That's wonderful. Great discussion. I'd encourage our viewers that if they do have follow-up questions or questions come to mind later, contact us on LinkedIn, send us a message, or if you have our email, just drop us an email. We'd be happy to discuss any questions. So